welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio News. It's our weekly roundup of some of the stories making headlines here in northern Michigan, and with us to discuss those stories this week from Interlochen Public Radio, Peter Payette. Peter, welcome back.
Hi, Bill.
Good to see you this morning. Let's talk about
nice to be here.
A couple of the big news stories, the harder news as we call it, starting with a kind of ongoing, 20-year-long murder case that's, as we've known over the past couple of months. There's some turmoil on that. We've got an overturned conviction.
Right.
So in northern Michigan.
At this point, I guess I'm a little unclear of the legal status, but Jamie Lee Peterson is no longer a convicted murderer. He was serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole in Jackson, I believe. He's still in Jackson, but a judge in Kalkaska has overturned the conviction for that murder, the murder of Geraldine Montgomery. Some lawyers, a team of lawyers from Chicago and in Ann Arbor had identified his case as a potential wrongful conviction. There was a lack of DNA evidence. Mm-hmm. There's now DNA evidence that points the finger at another man who will go on trial in December. But I believe as of this week, Peterson is no longer a convicted murderer, and he may or may not face a new trial.
My recollection, my understanding was, didn't he confess?
So he was in jail. He had been put in jail, I believe, for statutory rape. And he was in jail at the time of just after the murder. And he bragged to a cellmate that he had done that. Later he recanted, and the trial, a lot of the trial, or the defense of Peterson at the time, was based on the idea that police had kind of coerced him, kind of coached him along, that he had his facts wrong, and so the defense was trying to argue that he was mentally challenged and had said something sort of idiotic to his cellmate, and then faced the prosecution.
Was there the notion that he was involved at the scene somehow and just not directly responsible for the murder? That was the other question. That
was what the prosecutor said, that there were two, because there was DNA evidence that didn't match Jamie Lee Peterson's DNA. So they theorized that there were two assailants, and he was one, and they had never found the other. And and they maintain that story today, that this man, whose name I'm forgetting, I think his last name is Ryan, who is accused now, he's from Flint, and he was a suspect at the time. That he was the other perpetrator of this crime.
The other question, I mean, depending on what new charges or new trial is laid out for Peterson, do you foresee the possibility that he could be released between now and then?
And I'm a little unclear on that. He is still being held. He's still in Jackson, and it's my understanding he could end up back in jail, in the county jail in Kalkaska County, but. All that will depend on whether he's charged again.
Right. Your conviction is overturned, and at this point you haven't been charged with anything. At some point
they have to let you go.
Somebody's got to lobby for this guy to get released.
Right.
So,
I don't know how all that's going to play out.
That's interesting. We'll keep watching that one as well. The other big story, the murder that didn't happen in Traverse City, the murder for hire case and the allegations against a local attorney. You guys covered that one last week as well.
Right, and the hearing to decide whether there would be a trial was, I guess, 2 weeks ago on Friday, where most of the case was laid out, and then last week the prosecutor released the police report that he is using to prosecute the case. And it's a pretty salacious story. In fact, one of the things we sort of struggled with is how much of the backstory to report, because the alleged victim or would-be victim, Chris Cook, and the would-be killer, the would-be hire, Dale Fisher, have a relationship that's a little hostile and involves details of their children. And I noticed the newspaper decided to lay all that out in print. We sort of wondered, I mean, Chris Cook is really the victim in this alleged plot, and so for his family, some troubled dealings with Dale Fisher of his family over the years to now be spread in ink and well known in the community, we were a little conflicted about how much of that to discuss.
I was too, and I was kind of surprised to see all the details, like you said, in the paper. What kind of conversation happens in the newsroom about that?
We had a fair bit of conversation about it. In fact, sometimes if we need to consult somebody outside of our newsroom, we'll reach to Rick Pluta, who's the bureau chief in Lansing for the Michigan Public Radio Network. He covers the state capitol, but he's a longtime journalist and was a print reporter for many years and teaches journalism at MSU. So we had a couple conversations with him about because these are private individuals, they're not public officials. Yeah. Now, all these facts are in government documents. They're public record, but that doesn't mean you have to tell them all when you tell the story. So we had a number of conversations about what was ethical, what potentially might be slander, and really there isn't much danger of slander or libel in this instance, since it is a matter of public record, and all these facts in some way do pertain to the allegation that these two men were discussing murdering Chris Cook. There's
the notion too of how many of those details are relevant to this case at all.
Because Dale Fisher's not accused of anything.
Right.
He aided the police in this matter. So I do wonder how relevant they are when it comes to public consumption.
That you also got the potential notion for somebody out there to think that you or we, who also haven't gone into those details, are withholding something. Why aren't you telling the whole story?
Right.
Well, then you've got to decide what is the story.
We posted the police report on our website, and even though we refrain from sketching out details that were in that report, so we felt that was a good compromise. If people want to see all the details, they can go in and look at the police report, but we don't need to elaborate on them.
The man who was arrested, Clarence Gomery, the attorney, now has changed attorneys a couple of times, I believe.
Right.
We're just not quite sure where the defense is heading at this point, are we?
It's hard to see how they can defend against this. It looked like, based on that hearing, the line of defense will be to question police tactics and highlight, it appeared that Dale Fisher suggested to police that he wear a wire and go meet with Mr. Gomery while he was had a recorder on his body, and so I guess they're going to try and mount some defense along those lines. But we asked the prosecutor if we could, when he released the police report, we said, can we get the audio tapes? And he told us we could have all the audio tapes except one that he said he would fight tooth and nail to prevent from being released because he felt it was so incriminating against the accused that if it was released, it would be hard for Mr. Gomery to get a fair trial. So the prosecutor feels as though he has some pretty solid evidence that will support his case and the charge. And it is a little hard to see how they'll defend, what kind of defense they'll try and mount.
Wow, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that. What's your overall take on the release of documents and recordings and the FOIA request process, the Freedom of Information process that we go through? I mean, I filed a FOIA request a couple of, it must have been last year with a shooting incident in Grand Traverse County, and we wanted the 911 tapes, and
which shooting?
Were denied. That was Bobby Caldwell and Monica Anderson, man who shot his girlfriend at Traverse City.
Oh, out of the condominiums out to the west of town?
Right.
Okay, and they denied?
And it was denied that releasing it would hamper the investigation.
Well, police are entitled to do that. I think it's harder to, once it's in court, then presumably the police investigation is done and all that's been handed off to the prosecutor. I think it's harder for the prosecutor then to say, no, you can't have access to this, unless, as in this case, there's a concern that it's so damning that it would make it difficult to get a fair trial in Grand Traverse County.
There's some irony to that too, and on one hand I understand it. On the other hand, it's going to come out in court at some point. It will be public record. It will be
well, it may or may
publicized.
not. I mean, the one of the fundamental functions of the court is to decide what is admissible and what is not. So if an audio tape leaks out and is all over the radio and TV stations and being quoted in print, but a judge decides that's not admissible evidence, then that can really hamper the execution of justice. So I think that's the idea.
Excellent point.
Yeah, that the court has to decide if it's admissible or not before we trumpet it all over creation.
Save that for later.
Right.
Good. Well, hey, let's take a quick break here on the briefing room. We'll be back with more with Peter Payette from Interlochen Public Radio. Be right back.
Continuing financial support for Up North TV comes from East Bay Charter Township, the City of Traverse City, Elmwood Charter Township, and the Charter Township of Garfield. Their support makes it possible for our communities to create and enjoy local programming. Help bring awareness, promote your cause, or share your craft. Get started at upnorthmedia.org.
Welcome back to the briefing room. I'm Bill Froehlich along with Peter Payette, talking about some of the stories in the news this week. Peter, we both recently covered a situation going on between the Sierra Club and the Grayling Fish Hatchery, also run by the same folks that run Henrietta Hills Trout Farm. They've been granted a permit to expand operations. As I understand it, haven't done that yet, but to fight the permit, the Sierra Club is filing an appeal saying, whoa.
Right, saying the state didn't do its job. The state didn't give a proper explanation. The state acknowledged that this would degrade the waters of the Asabo River, but didn't justify. They need to give a reason why that degradation is justified. The Sierra Club says they didn't do that, and the Sierra Club is saying there's nothing to monitor the release of biological pollutants like diseases, parasites. According to the Sierra Club, the permit focuses on water quality, things like phosphorus, pollutants, but not on biological pollutants that can be a big issue, can cause a lot of problems in a fishery like the Asabo. So they say the permit should not have been issued. The state says, obviously the state thinks it should, and they're going to appeal it.
The question I had when we had the Sierra Club on our program was, at what point do you trust or not trust the state to do its due diligence? At what point do you say, we're the experts or we're better suited to know what you're doing than the state is? How many state agencies have to get involved before you're satisfied?
Before the Sierra Club is satisfied?
The Sierra Club is satisfied.
They're pretty judicious, I think. Did you have Marvin on your show?
Yes.
Yeah, Marvin knows what he's talking about. And Marvin has said to me, his view of state officials is that generally the people working in these departments are trying to protect resources and do a good job and follow the rules. I think they're pretty careful about when they file an appeal or file a lawsuit, which this is not a lawsuit. This is not a lawsuit. This is an appeal. An appeal, within the administrative process. I think the allegation from the opponents of this, and Marvin didn't say this to me, but folks from Anglers of the Asabo, is that this is more of a political maneuver. That there is a lot of interest at the federal level in aquaculture, in fish farming, and that this is now coming to Michigan, and that the governor is behind this, and that the state of Michigan is going to push aquaculture and not be too concerned about the rules that might hamper it. And so I think that's kind of the context in terms of whether they trust them or not. I think the belief of the opponents of this is that this is just the tip of the spear, and that there's more of this coming, and that it's more about political expediency and kind of promoting a new industry than it is about making sure all the rules are being followed.
We had the fish hatchery spokesman on too, Dan Vogler. And this is one of those cases where we had him on our program back to back. It's one of those cases where we finished talking with Marvin Roberson from the Sierra Club, and I was sold, so to speak. I was like, all right, you know what you're talking about. You've outlined your case pretty well. I'm on board, at least to the extent that I understand your concerns.
Right.
And then we talk with Dan Vogler, and then another 20 minutes goes by, and I'm like, okay, I understand. I'm on board with you.
Right.
I understand what you're saying. His argument is this is one of the most regulated operations of its kind that the agency, the DEQ, right, that they've ever approved in terms of the regulations they have outlined. You mentioned the not testing for parasites and disease in the fish. Dan Vogler's response to that was, well, that wouldn't be the DEQ's job anyway. That would be the Department of Ag's job. So the permit from the DEQ shouldn't address that, never would.
Well, and this is a big fault line running through this. Is the Department of Agriculture, I mean, especially when we start talking about fish farms out on the Great Lakes, is the Department of Agriculture the department that we want overseeing that? Because they're much more oriented toward the interests of businesses that are trying to raise crops,
right.
Potentially fish. Whereas if you talk to the biologists who know the Great Lakes and understand the ecological issues out there, they'll have a whole different perspective. And that, I was talking to Howard Tanner, who was the man who first, under his direction, the first salmon were put in the Great Lakes. And he said that the Department of Agriculture, meaning the federal, they're the reason we have Asian carp in the U.S. because originally the Asian carp were brought here to farm and in ponds down in southern states, and eventually they escape and they end up in the Mississippi River, and now we're hoping they won't end up in Lake Michigan. So he's saying we can't trust the agriculture officials at either the federal or the state level to manage this, because their interest is not in the fishery and in the overall ecology of a watershed like the Asaba River or the Great Lakes Basin. They're geared towards what farmers are trying to accomplish.
That's an excellent point. I asked Marvin about his background. He's a forest ecologist, I think is what he said. We were talking about some of the diseases and the parasites and whatnot, and he said, I'm not an expert in aquaculture, but this is what our team has kind of come up with for our concerns. And then I turned around and I talked to Dan Vogler and I said, Marvin admitted he's not an expert in aquaculture, but these are his concerns. And Marvin said, well, I'm the president of the State Board of Aquaculture. Yeah. So it's just kind of a funny, dichotomy there to say, well, actually, I am an expert in aquaculture and I know what I'm talking about.
Right.
So there was that. The other thing that surprised me, they're talking about, I think, eight weirs or 8 lanes at the fish hatchery here. He said, this is the 100th year of operation for this fish hatchery. Right. Just so happens we took it over last year. 50 years it was run by the DNR, and they had as many as 32 lanes. Is it weirs? Is that the word I'm looking for?
Raceways.
Spillways. He said, so we're at 25% of the capacity that the state had been running this for 50 years.
Sure.
The impact now, negligible compared to what has been done historically. Right. So he just feels like we're the only operation doing this right now, so we're getting picked on.
It's certainly true. I mean, this is the first one. I think this is the first permitted private fish farm in Michigan. I think 20,000 pounds of fish per year is the limit to have an unregulated operation. If you go above that, and I think the permit allows them to go up to 300,000 pounds. Right. So he is the first one, and he's getting picked on. Because people are nervous. But the thing is that if you look at Platte Lake, the first, and I think still the primary salmon hatchery, which is a different operation because they're raising more fish and they're raising them to a smaller size, but it provides some level of comparison because it's a concentrated animal feeding operation. And that in the 70s, that thing nuked Platte Lake. I mean, Platte Lake was forever altered because of the amount of phosphorus from the fish waste that was going into Platte Lake. The chemistry of the lake has changed. There's a lot happened to that lake. Today, the state has received national attention because it releases almost no phosphorus into Platte Lake. I mean, the amounts, I forget the numbers, but it's almost a negligible amount of phosphorus that now goes into Platte Lake. So they can get it out. You know, they can operate very cleanly. It's just it costs more money. So the question is going to be with these farms, how much cleanup are they willing to do? I mean, if you go to the sewage treatment plant in Traverse City, the operator of that plant will drink that water.
Not this week.
Not this week. But you take a tour and you see all these vats where all this sewage is coming in, and then you go out to where the clean water, he'll take a glass of that water, he'll offer it to you, and he'll drink it. I've seen him do that. So these things can operate as cleanly as you're willing to pay for, right? So that's really going to be the question, is how much are they going to be able to, you know, they have to make a profit or they can't operate. So where is that line? How much testing? How much water purification? You know, all these things weighed against making a profit and, you know, having a viable business. So they're going to get picked on. And it's going to be an interesting, because fish farming is really being promoted all over. I mean, it's a rising industry, and for a lot of good reasons. You know, fish it's a really healthy fat. I mean, there's a lot of good reasons to do it, but there's going to be a lot of questions for a while in Michigan.
There's questions also from I believe the Michigan League of Conservation voters about possible drilling under Hartwick Pines.
Hartwick Pines, yeah.
The pristine virgin forest, 400-year-old trees. I see. Tell us.
I think the most interesting thing about this is people I've talked to say, well, now what's so special about Hartwick Pines? And that's an opportunity to point out to people that we cut down almost every last tree in Michigan. I think that and a few cedars out on South Manitou, those are the only stands of old growth, meaning forest that was here, you know, prior to the arrival of Europeans. Almost every other single tree was cut down. There are a few here and there, you know, you'll in locations you'll find individual trees that were left, you know, beside a stream or wherever. But otherwise, we cut down every last one except in the lower peninsula, other than these pines. And so, yeah, they're kind of a symbol of the past, and these permits would allow drilling not to happen on that land, but for
adjacent to.
Well, and for the drill operations, because today with this deep shale, you know, the fracking, which is the newer deep horizon drilling, where they can send the drill down, they can go 2 miles down, and then they can turn and go horizontally a mile in any direction. And I'm told they could put the head of that drill bit into a 5-gallon bucket at the end of that line, that it's that accurate. So I'm assuming that it's that kind of horizontal drilling, or even slant drilling at shallower depths. They'll send the drill rig in at an angle. So the drill pad's over here, the minerals are here, and they drill, you know, and the virgin
trees are on top.
Pines are here. Yeah, so they drill down at shallower depths, not as deep as 2 miles underground, but, you know, maybe 700 feet. And I don't know. Often the rights are for all the minerals, so it could be either of those or both that might happen. And so there's concern that, you know, some problem could result from that. Generally, the problems are at the wellhead. And actually, most of the problems, I mean, most of the spills we have in Michigan are once it goes on the truck, there's pipes from the wellhead that, you know, send it off, you know, so chemicals or minerals are sent to a processing plant. And it's usually that, you know, a break in that line, or someone doesn't close a valve on the truck, and as they drive away, it's spilling down the road. That's usually where most of the spills happen. It's very rare that, you know, they'd puncture some high pressure pocket underneath, and, you know, gas would erupt. We did do a story in 73. Williamsburg basically became it looked like Yellowstone, because that did happen, and all this gas was forced up, and so there were cauldrons of gas erupting all over Williamsburg, and everyone had to evacuate the village. And So it's not impossible for something like that to happen, but it's extremely rare.
We're also 40 years later in terms of technology.
Those were people who, I mean, I think admittedly did not know what they were doing, or maybe they were from Texas and the geology was different here, so they hit something that they weren't accustomed to. I forget exactly.
They were looking for bubbling crude instead, maybe?
I don't know. I'm not sure, but inexperience played a role in that. So it seems highly unlikely that anything would ever happen to those pines. But
well, especially at that depth too. I mean, we're not talking 2 miles down of damaging root structures and tearing out the trees.
Right.
Something
No,
happens up
it's
on
about an accident.
Yeah.
That's what the concern would be, and I just think the probability is very low. But then other people would say the amount of gas down there is very small. Let's just leave it be. We don't need to go after that, that small amount of fossil fuel. We can just let that alone, and be safe. I mean, it's the same argument that you have about the Great Lakes, because we've now banned slant drilling under the Great Lakes for that reason, because we just don't want to risk it. That's a different argument, the Great Lakes, compared to a stand of trees. But it's the same, it's a similar kind of scenario.
The question I raised with the conservation group, this could come up every time, I mean, and has come up, as we all already know. This comes up all the time of whether it's appropriate, where it's appropriate. At some point, don't we have to sit down and actually have the discussion about the safety and legitimacy of fracking and put an end to that discussion so we don't keep having this argument about every single project that comes up?
Right. I don't know that we have it about every project. I don't know that there are many places where drilling is off limits. In fact,
but there seems to always be concerns. I mean, we've got this fracking neighborhood in Kalkaska, and people there are many times up in arms about it in their backyard.
Right. About a particular method of drilling. I mean, they're up in arms about this new deep shale horizontal drilling with these unconventional methods with chemicals that are proprietary and unknown to the neighbors. So there is concern about that. I don't think, I mean, there is a group of people trying to ban fracking, this type of hydraulic fracturing, but I don't know that, most of them are not on a case-by-case basis. I mean, I think most of the environmental community is saying we want some additional rules. This is new to us. This is not the same as the drilling that's been done in the past. It's, even though they do fracture rocks in those shallower wells that we've been drilling for 20 years or 25, 30 years even around here. But they're saying this is new. We need to update our rules to keep pace with it. We don't want to have, the kinds of incidents that you hear about in Pennsylvania and places like that. So that's what they're arguing. This argument about, are there some places we just leave alone, is a different case, and there's very few. I mean, the Pigeon River Country State Forest is one, but that is subject to a court agreement. I mean, you would have to open that court case and debate whether the settlement between Shell and I guess the residents in that area who sued Shell and worked out that deal so that there is no drilling in the Pigeon River Country State Forest. You would end up in court if the state tried to sell the rights to minerals under Pigeon River Country State Forest. And that's a fair amount of minerals. I mean, that's a big tract of land that has oil and gas underneath it that really has not been touched, because Shell has a few wells in there, but after the court case in the 70s, they stopped drilling new wells there. So I don't know that there are many case-by-case basis type issues like this Hartwick Pines one.
Yeah.
Which I think the state, I suppose they could pull they don't have to lease it. I mean, that'd be the simplest thing if the state just said, okay, we're not going to lease this. We're gonna take this out of the auction because it's Hartwick Pines and we'll just let it be. But my sense is that isn't how the state is operating these days.
No, I think you're probably right.
They don't bow to environmentalists who say this is a bad idea.
Nor do they turn down big bucks from from an oil and gas company.
Well, it may not be big bucks, though. It may go for pennies. It's an auction.
That's true, too. All right, Peter, those are some of the stories that we've been talking about the last week or so, but let's close here in the closing couple of moments with what you guys are working on this week.
Well, we had a story today on the rental housing market. You probably haven't tried to rent an apartment or a home recently, but it's insane out there. And it came up because we had a new employee start at the station, and he had to live in a campground when he got here, even though he'd been planning his move for months, and he just could not find a place to live. And he was surprised at how difficult it was. And so we have a story on today, and we have a mom in the piece with 5 kids who had to move into a campground because her home, that she has a job, she'd been renting a house for more than 2 years, and the house sold, and the new owners want to occupy it, so it's not a rental anymore. And apparently that's what's going on. For the last couple years, it's been hard. Buyers have had a hard time getting credit. They're just, housing inventory has not been moving. Now the market's kind of picking up. There's buyers. They're able to work with the banks. So houses are starting to sell. So people who were sitting on houses and renting them are now able to sell them or see a better market to sell. So all that rental inventory is coming off the market, and it is just about impossible to find a place to rent, and the prices are up quite a bit. I have a friend who has a home in Mesick. 2 years ago, they rented it out, and they had 6 applicants when they posted it on Craigslist or however they did. The people that started renting it 2 years ago are leaving, so they posted it again on Craigslist, and in 48 hours, they had 70 applicants to live in Mesick. And that was the interesting thing. This woman in our story, her home was in Caliva. So this is not just, it's difficult to find affordable rentals in Traverse City. She works in Thompsonville, I assume I'm guessing at Crystal Mountain. But so she works in Thompsonville. She can't find a rental anywhere in that area, which is not exactly a high demand housing. It's not the part of our region where you would think it would be so difficult, but it is.
Wow. All right. Well, that's on IPR today.
Yeah, be on our website.
Great.
By the time our listeners hear us here on the briefing.
That's true. That's true. Well, Peter, thanks so much for being with us. Peter Payette from Interlochen Public Radio. Appreciate having you in.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks to everyone else out there for tuning in to the show this week. We'll see you next time on The Briefing Room. I'm Bill Froehlich.